Good evening. Thank you for that introduction and thank you for welcoming me into your home. Well, strange circumstances these remain, but at least we can meet without the need for you to brave a late winter's evening. I'm aware that some of you will have heard me talk about Chile before, and I therefore didn't want to give you a shorter version of that talk. So tonight is a different talk that will hopefully serve as a taster for a country and a people that I've grown very fond of and I'm trying to understand. But I hope that it will also act as an introduction to my longer talk, and I hope too that you'll be able to hear that at your local centre at some point when circumstances permit. Tonight I'm going to talk quite a bit about geology and transport in Chile, linking these together, but also using these as a proxy for the dimensions of Chile and to illustrate its politics. There's lots of photographs, not all of them are mine, but most of them are. So, Chile, while it had a stagnant economy during the dictatorship years and was supported by the USA and indeed the UK as somewhere between a pawn and an enthusiastic player in Cold War politics, today Chile is a Southern Hemisphere country where the label of Global South that we tend to use nowadays rather than Third World doesn't really apply. Chile is a developed country, rich in natural resources. It has a low debt, 27% of GDP as against 78% in the UK and 82% in the United States. It has a modest but growing sovereign wealth fund worth something in the order of $25 billion. Chile continued to receive modest aid from the UK until 2018, but to quote the OECD, Chile transitioned from the upper middle income to the higher income category in 2011 and graduated from the list of official development assistance recipients in 2018. Its economy, I guess, could be compared to that of Poland or Hungary. A view of the faces of the people of Chile. Even today, Chile as a country is held back by politics and ultra-capitalist economics that makes even the United States look rather socialist. It rarely invests in social services or infrastructure. It invests very heavily in its police force, in its army, and a large and rather unnecessary navy. In fact, it has 10% more defence spending as a percentage of GDP than the UK. But much less of a role out there in the world. It also has a challenging geography and geology, as I will go on to explain. Chile is a very long country. It's a real challenge to fit it on a piece of paper or indeed a PowerPoint slide, so I've turned it slightly on its back, and rather on its back, to get it a reasonable shape to display for you here in this slide. It's as long as the United States is wide, 2,653 miles, 4,270 kilometres long, but it only averages 110 miles or 177 kilometres in width. So a very strange shape. You can travel from the Pacific coast to the mountains, to the Andes in less than 2 hours, and that fact gives me the excuse to show you some gratuitous scenery, as I have just indeed done. Chile's geology is driven by the fact that the Nazca Plate, which underlies this part of the Pacific Ocean, is pushing under the South American Plate and disappearing at the quite remarkable rate of 4 to 5 centimetres a year. That's really quite fast in geological terms. And the result of that is a series of earthquakes and volcanoes that occur down the length of the country. Villarrica, one of the most active of Chile's remarkable 500 active volcanoes, is shown in this slide here. It's quite a spectacular snow-capped mountain. Another view of it as the sun is beginning to set through the pine forests of southern Chile. I'm going to tell you a little bit of story about this island. This is Isla Mocha, about 20 kilometres off the Chilean coast. There's 3 interesting things I can tell you about this island. None of them have anything to do with coffee, by the way. The first one is that in the mythology of the native Mapuche people of Chile, the souls of the dead travel west to visit this island. The second unusual fact is that there is a white sperm whale that was known as Mocha Dick, which seems to have been the inspiration for the American writer Herman Melville's 1851 novel Moby Dick. But if you look very carefully at the photograph, there is one other fact that I think is very interesting about this island. If you look at it, there's a substantial coastal plain around the island. It's indeed a massive raised beach that extends to more than half of the island's area of 19 square miles or 48 square kilometres. Unlike raised beaches in Scotland, which took thousands of years to form as a result of post-glacial isostatic rebound, this raised beach formed in a few minutes as a result of 3 recent earthquakes. In 1960, the Valdivia earthquake, which had an enormous magnitude of 9.5, uplifted this island by 150 centimetres. In 2010, the Mole earthquake with a magnitude of 8.8, still enormous earthquake by world standards, caused a further uplift of 25 centimetres. And then in 2011, the following year, the Araucania earthquake with a magnitude of 7.1 caused a further uplift of 50 centimetres. So that's a total uplift of 2.25 metres, about the height of the room in which you're sitting, in 3 events that together lasted at most a few minutes. I think that's quite remarkable. So in Chile, geology is often at the forefront of people's lives. Whether it's providing this remarkable scenery, and we'll scroll across, fly across this one, and the scenery in Chile is really quite remarkable, or whether it is giving us the altitude at which we have enough snow for skiing in the middle of summer, or a rather dangerous hike to the top of an active volcano in this case. Dangerous not so much because of the risk of eruption, but because of the constant emission of noxious gas, which often you can't actually smell. About 20 tourists were killed on the crater lip of this particular volcano about a year before I went up there. I didn't go to the top for exactly that reason. But some people do. And they take somewhat of their life in their hands in doing that. About 6 months after I visited the ski slopes, this happened, the volcano erupted, so it is, as I say, one of the most active volcanoes in Chile. And we're reminded of that by signs reminding us of Chile's perilous position on this active plate margin, where there are real dangers in terms of not just volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, but also the tsunami that are a result of these earthquakes. People have had to adapt their lives around this geology. Let me just give you a quick explanation of what's happening with this geology. Slightly complicated diagram, but here we have the Nazca Plate descending beneath the Pacific Plate. So these are the grey-green coloured bodies of rock on the diagram. That subduction, as it's called, is giving rise to basically scraping the sediments from the top of the Pacific Plate, which itself is composed of very dark-coloured basic igneous rock. But the sediments are being scraped off the plate as it descends to form this accretionary wedge. And within that accretionary wedge and beneath on the surface of the descending plate itself are the zone where earthquakes actually take place. This squishing up, what better term could I use, gives rise to a coastal range of hills. Behind that coastal range is a raised central valley, a four-arc basin. And behind that again are the Andes Mountains, and that's where the volcanism takes place. So the descending plate begins to melt at a particular point, and that melting rock rises up to form these active volcanoes. So we have a coastal range, we have this long and relatively stable central valley where we still get earthquakes occurring, and then we have the Andes Mountains to the east of these. These zones are of interest for several reasons. I'll talk about the importance of the Central Valley in terms of transport a little bit later on, but they're also very important in terms of minerals. We have in this raised foreland basin in the north of Chile, in the Atacama Desert, the presence of evaporite minerals, which are of considerable economic value to the Chilean economy, as we'll see in a second. But also from the Andes, from the volcanoes, we have hydrothermal minerals that are probably of even more economic value in terms of the Chilean economy. So that's the basic explanation of the geology as it's going on, the heavy, dense, dark rocks of the Nazca Plate descending beneath the lighter, more granitic rocks of the South American plate. That's what's driving geology, that's what's driving, in many ways, Chile. What that geology gives, as well as earthquakes and volcanoes, are natural resources. This is one of Chile's largest copper mines, and the country derives the majority of its income actually from copper, iron ore and silver, as we'll see in a second. There's some gold. There is probably about $1.1 billion a year of gold extracted from the Andes. But the biggest earners, as I say, the best known one is copper, 15 billion per annum income from copper. It surprises me that actually there's more income coming from iron ore. So there's about $20 billion a year coming from iron ore. Some of that is processed. Chile is actually a major steel producer, so it's processing that iron ore in country and sending it out as steel, but an even larger amount of it is just sent out as raw iron ore. There's also about $1.9 billion of molybdenum. What do we use molybdenum for? Well, primarily to make steel. Gold I've already mentioned, and quite a larger volume of silver than there is of gold, but because of the silver is less valuable, that comes to about $200 million a year of silver. Much of these minerals goes to China, but also the US and Europe, but China is probably the biggest export market for these particular minerals. I haven't mentioned the evaporite minerals. In the middle of that photograph here we have nitrate. I'll say more about that in a second. And one of the main uses of nitrate right up until the First World War was the making of explosives. So Europe, I'm afraid, was the largest market for Chilean nitrate. And that was something else that shaped this country. So these evaporite minerals in the Atacama Desert, a high altiplano, very dry, elevated platform in the northern part of Chile. This is a photograph of a ghost town, a town called Humberston, that was built to serve as a British nitrate mine. These nitrate deposits came about through evaporation of what water was in this particular area, and some additional water that was pushed up into these high plains by the action of geology, by the action of subduction. These nitrate minerals and phosphate minerals and other evaporites formed at height and were exploited probably first in the early to mid 19th century. This particular town, as I say, Humberston, named after an Englishman born in Kent, James Humberston, who arrived in Chile in 1875. Actually, strictly he arrived in Peru, but Chile gained large tracts of Peru and Bolivia following a war started actually by the Peruvians and the Bolivians. And they inherited these mineral riches after 1884, after the termination of this particular war. And as I say, nitrate in particular was exploited as a fertilizer. The only other source of nitrate was as guano, but there are much bigger reserves of nitrate in northern Chile, and also to make explosives. It was only after about 1918 when artificial nitrate was produced by the Germans, primarily because they no longer had access to these nitrate resources in South America, and therefore were forced to produce artificial nitrate for use in explosives. It was only after 1918 that the industry finally declined. Humberstone kind of struggled on into the 1960s. There was a bit of a boost in production during the Second World War. It struggled on to the 1960s, and now this abandoned, it's not a village actually, it's a ghost town. It's a substantial town that housed thousands of workers and their families, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The lower photograph there shows an abandoned railway engine, more about railways just in a second, and the remains of the plant that actually processed this nitrate. So these evaporite deposits, as I say, formed over millions of years in this high altiplano. And while nitrate and phosphate are not so valued these days, another mineral that formed through the same process is lithium. And Chile has something in the order of 27% of the world's lithium reserves. Why are we interested in lithium? Well, any batteries that you have, your mobile phone will have a lithium battery in it, and indeed if you're lucky enough or wealthy enough to own an electric vehicle, a Tesla, or any other kind of electric vehicle, it will have a lithium battery in that. So lithium is becoming in more and more demand as we move away from a petroleum-driven economy to an electricity-driven economy, a renewable electricity-driven economy. And that lithium is primarily coming from Chile. It's going to China, where it's processed into batteries. Although actually Tesla have built the world's biggest battery plant just a year ago in the USA. So lithium is in a huge amount of demand, and that's the new mineral that is being taken away from this particular area, along with the new evaporite mineral, along with vast quantities of iron ore, copper, gold, silver, and so on. So Chile, as I said before, is a very wealthy country. Let's talk a little bit more about the people, and particularly I want to link to the transport that is used to move people around this very, very, very long country. Perhaps surprisingly, the vast majority of Chileans, whether you're a student, a worker, a middle-class individual, you are getting around Chile by bus. Buses are enormously popular, these quite luxurious coaches built in Brazil or in China, and they ply their trade north and south from Santiago, the capital, which is located approximately in the middle of the country. The principal road is Ruta 5, better known as the Pan-American Highway, which is either 4 or 6 lanes. It's a very good road, and it runs from the Peruvian border for 2,100 miles, 2/3 of the way down the country, basically until the Andes hit the Pacific coast, when running a highway is rather more difficult. So it runs down this central valley that is important agriculturally, but also important as a communications corridor between the various cities. The Pan-American Highway is government-owned, but it's franchised and tolled. So like many things in Chile, you pay for them. Many of the facilities in Chile are privately owned, relatively few are government-owned. This particular highway is government-owned. Some other highways are not government-owned. This one is government-owned. But it is you're charged a toll to drive along it, about 2,000 Chilean pesos. That's about £2.50 for every 50 kilometres or so. So if you're going long distances, it actually becomes quite expensive. And that's another reason that people tend to use buses, that if you're driving your own private car, a lot of Chileans clearly do drive their own cars up and down these roads, but if you're going long distances, you can end up accruing a rather large toll by the time you get to your destination. I guess the only slightly unusual thing about this rather good road is that it's not unusual to see people and horses wandering along the hard shoulder, as it's not illegal to actually be a pedestrian on this road. It's a rather dangerous thing to do when the speed limit is 125 kilometres an hour, 75 miles an hour. But you do see quite a lot of people doing that. Distances in Chile, as I say, are quite remarkable because it is a very long country. And this slightly complicated map, I've tried to highlight in the centre. The big red splodge is Santiago, the greater Santiago area. The other main urban areas, Valparaiso, just to the west of Santiago. It's kind of hidden in the red Santiago blob. And then Concepcion, which is the main city slightly further to the south. But you'll see that there are quite substantial centres of population between 100,000 and 250,000 people, fairly regularly spaced all the way down the length of the main part of Chile, from the Peruvian border right down to Puerto Montt, which is basically where the Andes Mountains hit the Pacific Ocean. So it seems sensible to connect all of these up. Indeed, the Pan American Highway does that. But the distances to travel on these buses are really quite enormous. So if we take 0 as our starting point, about halfway down that diagram, as we proceed north, you can see that it takes 7, 11.5, 22, 30 hours. These are hours, 30 hours by bus to reach Arica, which is close to the Peruvian border. And going south, it takes 7, 11.5, 13 hours to get down to Puerto Montt. Now remember, that's not the bottom of Chile, that's just the navigable bit in terms of this Pan-American Highway. So from top to bottom, Chile by bus takes you a remarkable 43 hours, which if you've ever travelled on a coach, no matter how comfortable that coach is, that is a heck of a long time. My ability to travel on coaches is somewhat limited, and to be honest, travelling from Edinburgh to London on a coach is about as much as I can imagine, something I've not done for a long time, because there are much more comfortable ways of doing it. And indeed, the much more comfortable way of doing it is by train. That's the way I would travel around this country. And one would expect there to be a pretty good railway running down through Chile, in that it's not like Britain, where you have to connect cities scattered all over the place to each other. You've just got to get from top to bottom down a relatively flat central valley. It should be a cinch, one would think. And indeed, there is evidence here of old railway engines that once plied their trade on the Chilean railways. If we look at this map, slightly difficult to see, but we'll scroll up from the south of Chile to the north, and that's basically showing the railway network of Chile in the 1930s. And you'll see that's quite extensive. There's a spinal network that runs up through that central valley that I've already mentioned, and there are spurs off that connecting in towns and cities on the way. And you can see that spine runs almost right up in the 1930s to the Peruvian border. A railway built by Chilean engineers, often helped with expertise and companies coming in from the UK, France, the USA. An amount of it was certainly designed to extract natural resources and allow these to be communicated across this immense country, primarily from east to west, so they could be shipped out in the ports. But it was, as I say, an easy route of navigation, a relatively easy route of navigation down this relatively flat central valley, which is a topographic manifestation of the geological setting. So quite a good railway network, one would think. This is the Meleco Viaduct, built in 1890, about 800 kilometres south of Santiago. A remarkable structure. You could say it has some likeness to the Eiffel Tower in its construction. Indeed, there was a proposal put forward by Gustav Eiffel for the building of this viaduct. You won't see a train crossing it today. 15 years ago, you may just have seen a train crossing it, but today it's disused and it is a heritage site. Other notables, these gentlemen here, not terribly good photographs, I apologise, but they were as good as I could get. Juan and Mateo Clark built the first railway across the Andes. Ferrocarril Transandino opened in 1908. These gentlemen were brothers. They were first-generation Chilenos. Their father came from Kilbarchan in Ayrshire, of all places. So a number of Chileans who were building this amazing railway network hung off this spine that ran down the central valley of the country. If you look at the railway network today, I'm afraid it's a rather sad vestige of what was once there. A rather discontinuous network that you can reasonably effectively travel south from Santiago to a couple of cities. With a bit of a struggle, you get to Concepcion. You might just get down to Temuco, although that is a rather discontinuous railway by the time you get down there. Further south, there is nothing. To the west, even from Santiago, only goods lines to the port at San Antonio. You can't get a train between Chile's two closest large cities, Santiago and Valparaiso. It's not possible to get a passenger train there. You've got to take a bus. North of Santiago, there are some vestiges of railway lines, but they're largely not there. If they are there, they're used in terms of mineral transportation. Basically, the story of the railway network was the story of no investment during the Pinochet years, and they were simply allowed to decline as private industry, private enterprise was seen as the god, and that was where any investment came, and it went into roads. It didn't go into railways. There was some investment after the Pinochet era. Some of the network reopened between about 2005, 2010. But that investment kind of dried up again, and other than the commuter network that runs down the country to Constitucion and perhaps to Concepcion, you will not find a regular train network in Chile. Again, an excuse for me to show you some gratuitous scenery. This is in the north of Chile, up in the Altiplano. The main use of railways is to move primarily copper and iron ore to the ports. These lines are usually run by mining companies. There are relatively few large trains, certainly no passengers, but they make for a very nice photograph with these remarkable mountains in the background. The tracks are not well maintained. The line speeds are very slow. It doesn't greatly matter in terms of your line speed. If you're hauling very heavy trains, the speed is probably going to be slow anyway. I could fairly easily run alongside these trains and keep up with them. They kind of rock from side to side on a rather unsteady track bed, often supported on very old wooden sleepers, and they're in desperate need of refurbishment and retamping. Chile's railways really are a picture of poor maintenance, partial or complete abandonment. Wires from former electrification projects kind of lie abandoned along the trackside. Half-hearted rejuvenation attempts where the investment in these often runs out, and we go back to a state of abandonment again. As I say, except for this commuter network that runs for about 200 kilometres south from Santiago, which actually does have very nice, very modern trains on it. Oh, what a difference this is. This is not Chile. This is Rome. I was lucky enough, as I'm sure many of you will have been able to do, to travel on the high-speed rail network in Italy, the Freccia Rosso high-speed trains, which can reach 400 kilometres an hour, and they are a joy to travel on. If we had these in Chile, remember, it's no complicated railway network. It's one line down the middle, basically, would do the job. And allow people to move around in considerably more comfort. We could move people at speeds at times that were 60% faster than you can do at present. So you could get from the top to the bottom of Chile in about 15 hours rather than the 40 odd hours that it takes at the moment. If we use Chinese high-speed trains, which are even faster, 450 kilometres an hour or faster than that, we could chop 70% off the travel times, get them down to 13 hours. Will that happen? Well, I'm afraid the Chilean government does leave most things to the mass market. They are very much under the influence of the super rich in Chile, who run the bus companies. They own the bus companies, they own the trucks that use the roads. They don't want the competition. So they are not enthusiastic to allow the government to invest in what could be a fantastic railway network. And the other problem is that they also own the airways. Low-cost airlines came to Chile. It used to be quite expensive, in fact very expensive, to fly within Chile. The internal costs were quite substantial. You would pay a couple of £100, £200-300 to get to the main cities within the country. But low-cost airlines came to Chile about 2015, 2016, and now flying up and down the country is quite cheap, and rather more people are doing it. Clearly, for environmental reasons, it's not a good idea. The last thing we want is more air travel, especially air travel where there are alternatives, and that is internal air travel within a country. There has been investment in Chile, and I shouldn't understate that. There has been considerable investment in two remarkable new metro lines in Santiago. Line 3 opened in 2019 and Line 6 had opened 2 years previously, which together added 37 kilometres and 28 new stations to the Santiago underground rail network. These are quite remarkable stations. They're cathedral-like stations with cathedral-like tunnels, also automated trains that don't have drivers on these new lines, and platform edge safety doors. Total cost of about $3 billion invested into this. Where this investment's come from is inevitably from the centrist and centre-left governments. These are the governments that invest in state infrastructure, in improving the lives of people, not the right-wing governments which tend to come along frighteningly regularly in Chile. The right-wing governments actually, possibly surprisingly, haven't cancelled these investments. They've just not added more to them. They particularly haven't cancelled the investments in the metro system because the metro is rather popular in Santiago. Its annual usage is approximately the same per head of population as the London Underground. But politics still comes into play. They can't agree a relatively short extension to the airport in Santiago because the wealthy bus company owners will veto these proposals. So it's the airport in Santiago is much closer than Heathrow is from central London. And actually the metro network goes almost there. It would be about a kilometre and a half extension, and they can't agree that thanks to politics. And indeed, public transport in Chile is very political. It is relatively cheap, but the very modest price rises gave rise to the mass protests of 2019-2020. It was kind of the fuse that was lit in terms of these price rises that the government insisted on pushing through, and rioters burned buses and metro stations, a lot of vandalism, but millions of people actually protested peacefully, so it is a mass protest movement, but unfortunately there was some considerable destruction took part in this protest. Chile Desperto means Chile woke up, and that is one of the slogans of the protest. There is some light in the future. Rather bizarrely, in the middle of these protests, Chile's right-wing president Sebastián Piñera, a right-winger but a populist right-winger, generally rather ineffectual, decided that it would be a good way to try and sweep the country's social problems under the carpet if he announced this Chile on Rails programme. The aim is to add about 1,000 kilometres of track to the Chilean rail network, to triple the usage of it, up to 150 million passengers a year by 2027, and double the volume of freight that is carried by the rail network. There's an awful lot of freight is carried on the roads of Chile, which cause a lot of damage to the environment in a variety of ways. These projects do, however, seem to be focused within a few hundred kilometres of Santiago, but at least they will introduce what will probably be Chile's first high-speed rail network to the port of Valparaiso, which, as I said, is currently only connected by road. I loved Piñera's words. Piñera isn't the brightest cookie in the pack, but his words. The truth is that Chileans have a true love story with trains. I believe that all Chileans have memories, anecdotes, and nostalgia for trains, and the development of our country took place through the railroad. Well, his right-wing predecessor certainly didn't invest in the railway network. I hope he will. And Valparaiso, I can't mention Valparaiso without showing you a little bit of the ascensiors, in English, I've almost forgotten the word, funiculars of Valparaiso, opened between 1880 and 1920, and actually mostly publicly run. Valparaiso is built on a cliff, one of these raised plateau area, so to get from the harbour area up to the principal residential areas, you use one of these ascensiors. And here's a little bit of video that actually shows the operation of one of these I was lucky enough to travel in. As I say, they're mostly public run. There were originally 30 of these in Valparaiso, a very international city. 16 of them remain, and they are all classified as National Historic Monuments. And to close, because I do have to draw to a close, my time with you, I'm afraid, is over. But I thought I would finish with a couple more faces of Chile, and these are faces that only a mother could love. A Chilean turkey vulture on the left, and a sea lion. I haven't had time tonight to talk about Chile's unique wildlife. But for that, my other talk, Chile, A Land of Surprises, I will talk a little bit more about the wildlife and introduce you to that. I look forward to welcoming you to that talk when circumstances permit. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed what I've said tonight. I've only touched on a few aspects of Chile. There's so much that I could talk about, but I hope it has been of interest to you. I hope I've given you an insight into a country linking its geology and its geography, and shown how these have combined to create wealth, but also complex and enduring problems. Thank you very much for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'm very happy to receive them. Thank you indeed.